This is to freshen up your poor-looking self. The client called Brandon threw beer at me. He had the worst personality. The people from his workplace also threw beer at me, and I've reached my limit. I wonder how much trouble he needs to cause us before he's satisfied. Due to Brandon, our company went through a rough patch, and the employees he misled were also in trouble. Thinking about selfish Brandon always made me furious. So, I decided to get back at him. Then, the deal for $200 million is off, effective immediately. What? He looked confused, so I pointed my phone at him to ensure he could hear the playback clearly. Hearing the recorded words, Brandon's attitude changed drastically from before, and he started apologizing. But I didn't pay any attention to him. No matter what he said, I had no intention of forgiving Brandon. My name is Alex Johnson, and I'm 32 this year. I work as the CEO of a luxury watch manufacturing company. My company has rapidly grown by hitting it big with our original brand watches. It's a demanding job, but it's also very rewarding, so I'm satisfied with my work. What got me interested in this job relates back to an incident from my childhood. I had a beloved grandfather, and once his cherished large antique clock broke. That clock was a cherished possession my grandfather had since childhood. He tried various repair shops in an attempt to fix it, but unfortunately, his efforts were in vain. The clock was too old, and ultimately, no one could repair it. Seeing my grandfather sadly looking at the broken clock made me want to fix it somehow. I'll become someone who can fix any clock when I grow up. Is that so? You're kind, Alex. But don't worry about me. Pursue your own dreams. Years passed, and I ended up working in the watch industry, but I never managed to repair that antique clock, which now sits quietly in a corner of my house. My grandfather passed away when I was 20, and not being able to show him the working clock again is one of my biggest regrets. It was just before noon. I had just left the CEO's office and was on my way to the reception room. Along the way, I saw employees from different departments looking tired and chatting in the hallway. Such scenes had become common in the company. Normally, employees from different departments wouldn't have much to do with each other, but due to a staff shortage, this was now a frequent sight. This was all because a few months ago, we had to fire an employee named Brandon, who had deceived several colleagues, causing them to resign. Brandon, a man in his 50s known for his sharp gaze, always flaunted his wealth with flashy ties and watches. His work attitude was significantly worse compared to other employees, which led to his dismissal. However, after being fired, Brandon promised better opportunities at other companies to some of our talented employees. As a result, several employees took his word for it and left the company. This led to a severe staff shortage, forcing various employees to take on additional duties from other departments. Sighing as I walked, I finally arrived at the reception room. I was supposed to meet with a client at this time, but it seems they haven't arrived yet. While confirming there were no visitors inside, I spoke to a male employee who had prepared coffee in the room. It seems our client hasn't arrived yet. Jess, they called a short while ago to say they'd be about 5 minutes late, so it might take a bit longer. In this company, which is struggling with a staff shortage, even as the president, I can't afford to take it easy. That's why I'm doing the work that the sales department would normally handle, but it's started to wear me out. Probably because I've been busy lately filling in at the manufacturing plant, helping with marketing and public relations, and so on, leading to accumulated fatigue. I'm a bit tired, so I'll rest on the sofa. Please don't mind me and continue with your work. Oh yes, understood. As I sat down on the sofa in the reception room and closed my eyes, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. With my eyes closed, various recent events flashed through my mind. If it weren't for Brandon, the company wouldn't be in this situation. It turns out that the employees who resigned, swayed by Brandon's promises, couldn't find employment at the better company he had promised. Those who were deceived couldn't return to our company and seemed to struggle to find new jobs. While I feel sorry for their situation and don't blame them for leaving since where they work is their choice, considering the company's reputation, I couldn't simply offer help easily. So, when recruiting new talent, I plan to hire a diverse range of individuals. This means more preparations and likely even busier days ahead. As I pondered the future, the male employee who had been working in the reception room called out to me. He seemed to have been on the phone with someone while I was resting. "President Johnson, it seems the client has just arrived. I've laid out all the documents for the deal on the table." "Understood. Thanks for preparing. It might be tough since we're so busy, but hang in there until we can hire some new staff." "Yes." After sending off the employee with a bright response, the client appeared in the room a few minutes later. I stood up from the sofa to greet them, but was stopped in my tracks. The flamboyantly dressed man who entered was not the person I was expecting. The man wearing the gold tie was flaunting a luxury brand watch on his wrist as if to show it off. Furthermore, his tie-pin was adorned with a remarkably large gemstone I'd never seen before, and the wallet peeking out from his open briefcase was clearly a designer brand. However, his appearance and possessions were quite shocking. Those aspects were of little consequence. But what surprised me most was the fact that the man was Brandon, who had left the company a few months ago. Faced with this unexpected situation, I was quite confused, but as the head of a company, I couldn't afford to be lost in thought. I took a deep breath to calm myself before turning to face Brandon again. "Brandon, why are you here? It's obvious, isn't it? I'm in charge of this deal now. Can't you understand that? Oh, maybe being poor means you can't even afford a decent meal, so your brain's too slow to keep up." Hearing his rude opening remarks, I wanted to escape from reality, but I endured it for the sake of the company. Perhaps for someone who dines on steak every day thanks to his wife's money, this might be simple, but for ordinary people like us, it was a bit hard to grasp. Is that supposed to be sarcasm? Seems like poverty makes even the bitterness of defeat sound pathetic. Perhaps because I showed up with a raggedy towel when firing Brandon, he's been looking down on me, calling me poor. This digression aside, that day the air conditioning was broken, and I needed anything to wipe off my sweat. It was just something I had on hand to cope with the sweltering heat until the repair service arrived, but I never thought that alone would lead to being labeled as impoverished. In his mind, I must be living in extreme poverty, unable to afford even tomorrow's meal. Unlike me, Brandon seems to consider himself wealthy. He indulges in luxury using the money earned by his wife. Eating steak for breakfast, buying new cars, it seems he used to boast about such things to his colleagues. Despite it being his wife's earnings, he doesn't seem to find it embarrassing to brag about it. So I muttered quietly, though Brandon didn't seem to hear it. "It's not like you earned it yourself." "What was that? Did you say something?" "No, it's nothing." Brandon entered the reception room with an air of nonchalance, plopping down on the sofa. Leaning back, he crossed his legs and gestured with his eyes for me to sit as well, so, feeling tired, I decided to sit back down on the sofa. It was impossible to have a calm conversation with Brandon, but I couldn't just stand there the whole time either. "It's been a while. I haven't seen your face in months." I had to approach this not as interacting with another person, but with the patience one might use with a nonverbal child, to prevent my anger from taking over. "Are you doing sales work at your new company, just like you did here?" "Yeah, I'm cracking the whip as a manager over there. Unlike here, there are no sticklers for rules, so I've been able to work more freely." His words showed no signs of remorse or change. He's probably continuing his selfish ways at his new workplace. This reassured me that my decision to fire him was correct. If something like Brandon had continued to be in my company, other employees would have been influenced, and the company would have been corrupted. It was indeed better to have fired him sooner rather than later. However, I hadn't anticipated that he would deceive other employees and cause such significant damage to the company. By the way, what about the others who left around the same time I did? Have they come back to your company? Despite being the instigator, Brandon asked with feigned innocence. Suppressing the discomfort welling up inside me, I shook my head. Of course not. It's not that simple to just let people go and then rehire them. That's right. He laughed smugly and clapped his hands, seemingly amused. I couldn't understand Brandon's feelings at all. Having asked what I wanted to know and not wanting to engage in any more personal conversation that would upset me, I decided to move on to the main topic. Let's switch gears then and move on to the discussion about our deal. After that, we proceeded with the business discussion. At the end of our conversation, he stared at me intently and said, "You look quite worn out. I heard about the staff shortage. It must be tough. It's sad to see the head of my former company looking like this." Despite his words, he left the reception room with a mocking smile. Frustrated, I pounded the table in front of me with my fist. Brandon likely came here to see the state of the company. He must have had someone else switch roles with him to come here. The thought of his maliciousness in mixing personal vendettas with business made me feel sick. Around midnight, after finishing work, I returned to my apartment and headed straight for the old clock in the corner. Living alone since leaving my family home, I brought some furniture from there to help cope with homesickness. Just looking at and touching these familiar pieces of furniture from my childhood brings me comfort and reassurance. Upon closer inspection, there are lines marked with a marker indicating my growth spurts and stickers from candy wrappers stuck on them. Looking at these traces of my past life reminds me of my father, who watched me grow, and my mother, who would buy me sweets on her way back from shopping. After indulging in nostalgia for a while, I turned my gaze to my grandfather's old clock. All the furniture I brought, like the dresser and table, are functional, except for the old clock, which is the only exception. Having lost its purpose of telling time, it now merely stands in a corner of the room. Whenever I have some free time, I try various methods to repair it, but it remains motionless. Touching the old clock, memories of my childhood with my grandfather come flooding back. When I gaze at this clock and think about time, it allows me to reflect on how I've lived my life. Really, how so? Whether I've lived in a way that I can be proud of, whether I've spent my time meaningfully, and so on. I think the great thing about clocks is that they give you a chance to reevaluate yourself. I loved my grandfather, who would look at the clock with such a gentle gaze. Encouraged by these memories, I felt motivated to face tomorrow with renewed vigor. As I was psyching myself up, I heard the ringtone of my cell phone. It was an email from an employee at the company. The content mentioned company's year-end party. It seemed a slight change in location from last year. It seems the new location is near the company where Brandon works. I shook my head to clear away any unpleasant thoughts and quickly replied to the email. During that time, it seems I had received another email from someone in the sales department. As I read through the contents, I couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. What? A scandal has occurred. The email detailed a scandal involving a company we had considered a reliable partner. In such cases, the course of action for my company is clear. Naturally, continuing dealings with a company involved in a scandal could potentially harm us, so it should be stopped immediately. However, I found it hard to believe that such an incident had occurred. I called a person from the company involved. This company, a high-end watch retailer, had significant business deal with us. It was a company that had never caused any major issues before. I believe Emily was in charge. The person handling our business deal was a woman in her 50s named Emily, known for her seriousness and integrity. Even I, who have been covering for the sales department, have met her a few times. There was a time when an employee preparing coffee in our reception room fainted while Emily was there. Unfortunately, my leg had gone numb and I couldn't move immediately, but Emily kindly stepped in to take care of the situation in my stead. That's why I found it hard to believe that a company with someone like her could be involved in a scandal. According to her, a recent recruit had embezzled company funds and passed them to some nefarious group. Usually, their hiring process is rigorous, but this individual was hired by a temporary staff member, allowing someone with dubious background to join the company. My company is currently experiencing a similar situation with needing replacements, so I couldn't fault them for this. Afterwards, Emily and I had a long talk before ending the call. Looking back, it's ironic that this incident would later lead to getting back at Brandon, showing how unpredictable fate can be. Several weeks had passed. The day of the year-end party had arrived, so I was inside a pub. Sitting at a corner table, I had just finished checking the attendance list. An hour had passed since the start, and the employees, now under the influence of alcohol, were making merry. Due to prior engagements or feeling unwell, a few had left early, slightly reducing the number from the start. Remembering an employee who had collapsed near the pub last year due to excessive drinking made me worried. Fortunately, there were no serious issues or thefts, but it was a chilling moment. It might be wise to check the vicinity to ensure nothing similar happened. I informed a nearby secretary that I would step outside. Then, the secretary quickly brought me a towel. It's a bit unpleasant, but it's because there's a chance an employee who has collapsed on the street might vomit when helped up. Last year, dealing with such a situation was troublesome. However, the towel got slightly dirty, perhaps from touching something on the way. Noticing this, the secretary offered to bring another, but I declined. This is fine. It's just a small stain on the corner, and for someone who can't manage their drinking to the point of passing out on the street, this towel should suffice. While I wouldn't go as far as firing someone for such behavior, I plan to discipline any employee found in such a state. As I left the pub, washed by the secretary, I reflected on the past weeks in the cool night air. With new hires settling in, the atmosphere within the company was stabilizing. The absence of the need to multitask across departments meant fewer chances for major issues to arise. I was enjoying the rare opportunity to unwind at the year-end party when I encountered an unwelcome individual. Standing before me was the person I had reunited with in the reception room weeks ago. "Hey, Alex, what are you doing here?" Brandon had emerged from a nearby pub. Perhaps his company was also having a year-end party. I felt like holding my head in frustration at this coincidence. I wanted to ignore him and pass by, but it seemed he wouldn't allow that. "Speaking of which, your company holds its year-end party around this time, right? We do the same." "Is that so? Why don't you head back inside, then?" "Don't be like that. I just saw one of your employees passed out against a fence nearby." I wanted to end the conversation quickly and leave, but his words caught my attention. "Is that really true?" "Yeah, of course. Aren't you going to look for them?" I stared at Brandon's smirking face, reeking of alcohol. It sounded utterly dubious, but I couldn't just ignore it. "All right, thanks for letting me know." "No problem. We used to work at the same company, after all." Reminding myself that I was doing this to ensure my employees' safety, I decided to search the area. After meticulously checking the surroundings for about 10 minutes, I found no sign of anyone resembling our staff. I hoped the inebriated employee had sobered up enough to make it home, but the thought of them being involved in some incident made me anxious. Reluctantly, as I didn't want to intrude on their private lives, I considered calling those who had already left to check on them. That's when Brandon approached me again. Holding a beer mug, he staggered towards me, noticeably more intoxicated than before. Before I knew it, I found myself back in front of the pub where Brandon had been. Brandon, staggering towards me, pointed and laughed. "Huh, you actually took it seriously. That was obviously a lie." It seemed I had been deceived. I could feel my fists trembling with a surge of anger. "Cut the jokes, I'm seriously angry now." "You're already angry, aren't you? Serves you right. And why are you holding a dirty towel? Couldn't you find anything cleaner? You really are poor." Huh? No matter how infuriated I was, I knew I shouldn't resort to violence. As I looked down, trying to contain my anger, something cold was poured over my head. The golden liquid was the beer that Brandon had been holding moments ago. Serves you right. Then, Brandon dragged me into a nearby pub. Dragged with great force, I fell into the pub. Looking up, I saw the place was filled with middle-aged men in suits, their faces flushed as they made a loud ruckus. Brandon began talking to them in a friendly manner. "Hey, bring some beer over here. This guy is too arrogant. He even had the nerve to fire me from my old job." These people were likely from the company where Brandon worked. Responding to Brandon's call, the men inside the pub started to gather around. With smirks on their faces, they tilted their beer mugs in their hands. The liquid inside was poured over me all at once. Drenched in beer one after another, I stood up, sympathizing with the bewildered pub owner. Brandon and his group were unlikely to bother with cleaning up the mess on the floor. After apologizing to the pub owner, I turned my back on Brandon and his group without giving them another glance. If I saw their disgraceful behavior any longer, I might not be able to hold back from striking. This is to freshen up your poor-looking self. However, just before leaving the pub, I heard a taunting voice and reached my breaking point. I turned to Brandon with a final remark. "Then, the deal for $200 million is off, effective immediately." What? It seemed Brandon was asking for his own ruin, so I decided to push him into the depths of despair. Standing with an empty beer mug, Brandon let out a foolish sound. Faced with his inability to grasp the severity of the situation, I elaborated. "Exactly what I said. The deal is off." "What are you talking about? My company doesn't have such a deal with yours." "Is that so? What about your wife's company?" "No way." A few weeks ago, after checking the year-end party email, I had confirmed that it was from Brandon's wife. During that call to Emily, I had learned about the scandal caused by one of her subordinates. Therefore, she asked me to cancel the $200 million business deal to avoid causing any trouble for us. Despite her husband's behavior, she seemed to be a sincere and good person. Business requires constantly considering benefits, but since it's conducted by humans, it's impossible to completely detach emotions. Torn about the situation, I felt it would be regrettable to lose my connection with her, so I said to Emily on the other end of the phone, "Since you weren't the one who caused the scandal, once the commotion settles down, we'll look for the right time to resume our business deal." While I had to maintain my company's dignity and couldn't act immediately, I promised to restart the dealings once things cooled down. But the man before me was unaware of such a conversation. Ending my recollection, I called Emily right there to explain the current situation in a low voice. I also asked her to confront her husband with the reality of the situation. I turned my cell phone speaker towards Brandon. "Darling, President Johnson is right. I was going to tell you later, but for a while, my company won't be able to deal with anyone, so it looks like we'll be living a poor life for a bit. I'm sorry." Hearing this, Brandon spent a few seconds in a daze before his face turned pale. "No, this can't be. You're joking, right? You're not trying to trick me, are you? How could I joke about something like this? Is this for real?" Realizing the gravity of the situation, Brandon trembled and fell to his knees. and he began apologizing to me repeatedly. "Please, don't cancel the dealings with my wife's company. We won't be able to live." Despite his desperate pleas, none of his words resonated with me. "This is serious. Please, we used to work at the same company, remember?" He didn't apologize for what he did to my company. He only thought about himself. There was no helping hand for such a person. I might catch a cold, so I'll be heading back. So, without saying a word he wanted to hear, I decided to leave the scene. Upon returning to the year-end party venue, my employees greeted me with shocked expressions. "President Johnson, what happened to you?" The employees, wondering if it had rained, looked out the window in confusion. Among them, a secretary who came close might have realized what happened by the smell of beer. After bringing another towel, she started arranging a taxi for me. Later, I had someone buy me new clothes, and I changed in the restroom, but I still felt sticky. In such a state, I had no choice but to head home early. As I waited outside for the taxi, Brandon ran up to me, out of breath. "Good, you're still here. Please, President Johnson, don't cancel the dealings with my wife's company. I apologize for splashing beer on you." Brandon repeated his apologies in front of me. Despite his efforts, my mind was made up. Did he think that by pleading earnestly, my feelings would change? Without looking me in the eyes, Brandon kept repeating the same words. Then, hearing his voice, my employees came outside. "Why is Brandon here? And you mentioned beer earlier. Don't tell me you're the one who splashed it on President Johnson." They glared at Brandon with disdain. This could turn the year-end party into chaos. Not wanting to involve the employees who were having a good time, I tried to return inside, but Brandon grabbed my clothes from behind. "Don't leave me. Are you planning to abandon me?" As I pondered what to do, the employees scolded him. "Enough is enough. Do you have any idea how much trouble your actions have caused our company? That's right. Don't cause us any more trouble. We didn't even want to see your face again. Just disappear from our sight now." Brandon, who seemed shocked to be confronted with such words, trembled. Each time he faced the employee's verbal onslaught, he seemed about to say something but ended up only trembling his lips without uttering a word. Eventually, as if resigning to his fate, his shoulders slumped and he wandered off unsteadily. After he was out of sight, a wave of exhaustion hit me. Given his condition, it seemed unlikely he would show up in front of us again. Then, I took a taxi home. Perhaps influenced by my parting words to enjoy the rest of the party on my behalf, it seems the year-end party continued without further issues. Upon receiving photos from my secretary of the employees enjoying themselves, I checked the images and breathed a sigh of relief. As I was about to take a bath, dragging my tired body, the sound of an incoming email notification from my cell phone echoed again. It was a message informing me that Brandon had returned home to Emily. Putting off my bath, I called Emily. "Hello, do you have a moment? My husband just got home and explained everything to me. It seems he was quite rude to you and your company." It appeared she was eager to apologize for her husband's actions. Imagining her sincere face, the unpleasant feelings I had harbored earlier began to dissipate. "It's okay. I'm not too bothered by it. But I'm sorry if he disrupted your enjoyable year-end party. Everyone seems to be having a good time still. Thank you for your concern." I had no intention of blaming Emily. I guess our company is completely disliked by hers now. "Not at all. Both I and my team know you're not at fault. Please don't say such things." "Thank you. Even if it's just a white lie, it makes me feel a bit better." It wasn't a lie, but she might find it hard to believe. With her heartfelt apologies, I couldn't think poorly of her. "By the way, I've been curious about something." Feeling it was cruel to make her apologize any further, I diverted the conversation by asking something I had been curious about for a while. I inquired about the reason why the self-centered Brandon and Emily with such contrasting personalities, ended up getting married and becoming a couple. I wondered why two people with completely different characters decided to have a wedding ceremony. Oh, that. Actually, we didn't decide on the marriage ourselves, Emily explained awkwardly. It was decided by our parents. Their marriage was arranged without considering their own wills. Their parents were close friends and thought their children would be compatible. Thus, they arranged the marriage, ignoring Emily and Brandon's own desires. Those are terrible parents. I was astounded by her story. But it explained why someone as selfish as Brandon could exist. Emily seemed determined to divorce him. She sounded relieved over the phone. Once I divorce, I plan to start over and rebuild the company. When we're able to do business again, may I reach out to you? Yes, of course. I look forward to the day we can work with your company again. Though she may face many challenges ahead, I'm sure she'll be all right. No matter how daunting the obstacles, she's strong enough to overcome them. Later, it seemed Emily had cut ties with Brandon. After the divorce, he reportedly moved to her in down apartment. But that wasn't the end of his troubles. The incident that night had been witnessed by a company executive, it seems, making Brandon feel unwelcome at work. I hear through the grapevine that the other employees who doused me with alcohol are experiencing similar discomfort. Some were demoted or punished. Brandon was demoted to an ordinary employee. Eventually, he couldn't bear the hostile work environment. He resigned from the company and became reclusive in his apartment. Meanwhile, as the company continues to grow, we've been facing busier days, but everything is moving along smoothly. Our products are selling well, and the new employees are all hardworking and contribute significantly. Without a troublemaker like Brandon, the atmosphere within the company is always positive. By the time a year had passed, Emily's company had recovered from the scandal's damage, and we were able to resume transactions with them. It was a joy to see her face again when I attended a business meeting with the sales department. It's been a while. Just like I said before, I've come to do business with your company again. I'm really glad you've managed to recover. Gradually, from that reunion, we began to talk more and developed a friendship, which was a positive outcome. As the number of employees increased, I gradually found myself with more free time. I took this opportunity to refine my clock repair skills and finally managed to repair my grandfather's clock. It was a challenging task that took several days, but I managed to fix the old clock. Filled with a sense of accomplishment, I thought of my late grandfather and spoke to the clock. I've finally got the clock working again, Grandpa. I wonder if you're watching over me from heaven. I hope the sound of this clock can reach you there. The ticking of the clock, moving for the first time in decades, sounded like a blessing for the new days ahead.